Throughout Stage 1 and leading up to Masters London, G2 had to mount a major comeback in Americas. This came off the back of a slow start that even they themselves have called a bad meta read pairing Astra and Harbor. While G2's implementation came up short, today I'm going to make the case that they were actually right about Harbor's power level and explain why Stage 2, and even Champs, should reveal Harbor as a major player. So, how am I going to convince you that an agent that even America's Golden Boys had to abandon is suddenly going to be a meta mover? Well, since he's a controller, ground zero has to be his smokes. How do we assess smokes though? I want to start by setting some baselines. Here we have a diagram of the average plant times across VCT Stage 1, giving us an average plant time of 54.8, functionally 55 seconds. If we expand that out to include post-plant, we get the time of an average round. And if we adjust that even further to assume that a controller needs time to play with their smoke to get value, we can ballpark the smokable time in an average round to be around 85 seconds. That's a cool number and all, but in order for that to be useful, we have to think about the structure of those rounds and exactly what that means in material terms. There are going to be clearly definable smoke phases throughout each round. For attack, those are start of round map control, second step map control, exec, and stall and post plan. Defense has a similar set of windows, with stall smokes shifted a few seconds ahead of attack's map control and execute steps, and their post plant smoke being for retake rather than stall. When it comes to addressing controller viability, when we're looking at these rounds with 4 distinct smoke phases, we're already muscling out a ton of the cast. Clove, Brimstone, and Mix are out of the question. Omen's close, but his cooldowns don't cycle quickly enough to cover second phases. Viper can technically hit enough smoke uptime, but doesn't have the placement flexibility. Astra can get there with creative use of dissipates for map control steps, but it's going to require a specialist. But Harbor, with his 30-second cooldown, 20-second coves, and his high tide, he deals with it no problem. So why isn't this already self-evident to everyone? Well, a lot of teams simply bypass the quandary entirely and go with double controller, but also we have to consider that the average intervals we're talking about here aren't always the best representation of reality. If we go back to our graph, there's a really obvious spike in plant time frequency between 20 and 35 seconds. If instead of the average, we look at the median, or most commonly occurring plant timing, we get the 5-second window between 29 and 34 seconds. That in turn gives us a smokable time closer to 60 seconds compared to that 85 from earlier. Current balance, specifically the lower initiator util volumes that we're seeing, has led to fewer macro strategic steps in rounds. Fewer steps means fewer smoke phases, and fewer smoke phases means that Harbor's superiority in that category isn't always front and center. With all that said, Harbor does still have an edge in a lot of rounds and has the best versatility when it comes to smoke timings, but he still needs a little more edge in these commonly occurring shorter rounds. Fortunately, he has that too, and it comes in the form of smoke positioning flexibility and the number of bottlenecks that he can cover. For an example, I want to look at an atypical exec type that Harbor is an ace at facilitating, the Ascent Spawn Split. We're going to jump into a mid-round where we've already done an open and are shifting into a mid-step with drone and a pre-existing cove on cat. From here, we can claim mid-2 and mid-3 fairly comfortably, breaking the barrels to market crossfire with a Phoenix flash and normal scaling. Flowing into the next step is where we start getting outsized value from Harbor. Our high tide disincentivizes almost any reaction from the right side of the map. Waylay can dash to crosshair break our spawn push, while Sova holds for anyone foolish enough to push our high tide. Then, our duelists keep scaling to pinch sight from spawn, and that creates enough back pressure for our Vice to scale A main, and for our Harbor to get out through market and join her on lane. Moving on to the proper exec portion of this, Waylay refracts just before the hit, Phoenix carves out stairs with his Blaze Wall, Harbor surges jail so that any anchor there either eats the near sight and gives us info on them, or they shift into the LOS of the Phoenix's second flash, which we use for him and Waylay to push sight. From here, Phoenix, Harbor, and Waylay commit to the site clear and Harbor plants while Vice picks up flank coverage, and Sova continues to play his first contact on spawn rotators. Once site is secure, Waylay can refract if she hasn't already and immediately pick up an off-contact second line against spawn rotates. Phoenix can hold Sova's mid from stairs, giving us an extremely well-insulated post plant. Oh, and did I forget to mention we also have another cove coming off cooldown? That means we can either re-up our spawn rotation denial by coving off ramp towards garden and carving off that right side of the map again, or we can use it to set a second layer of stall in any of the secondary bottlenecks closer towards the site. It's an attribute basically exclusive to slicers, meaning Viper and Harbor, where they can cut up the map in such extreme ways, even on their attack, that they can play a defense in depth. They can create these layers of stall, regardless of which half of the map they have to start on. And if you thought that play was cool, I just released a full Premiere playbook for that comp on Ascent to my Patreon. If you're interested in more of my content, over there I release agent and team comp tier lists for every major patch, as well as regularly release playbooks just like this one. While between teams, that Patreon is my main source of income, so a massive thank you to all of my supporters. Enough of that though, we've literally only talked about Harbor's smokes. Moving on to one of the cooler parts of this kit, Storm Surge is a truly unreasonable ability. We're talking about something that can proxy as paranoia for near sight during exec or anti-exec, while also giving information like we just saw in that spawn split. Not only that, but because of that info, it can also proxy as a piece of reclear util. That flexibility means there's a wide range of potential use cases for the ability that give it a degree of depth that far outstrips its competition. Even when you move over to maps with much more open space, like Breeze, there's still no shortage of valuable use cases. And last but not least, we get back around to his ultimate, and this is where we come full circle because it's extremely easy to give G2 their flowers here. In a single map of a single series, they showed us nearly every archetype of Harbor ult we could want, defending retake and anti-exec, and attacking exec and post-plant. Starting with retake, it's a fairly straightforward one where they front-to-back retake A with a full site clearing Reckoning that settles as an anti-A main smoke to deny repushes. Throwing Reckoning as the initial catalyst of the retake also meant that it was down in time where G2 was able to push the last attacker in A main. Where these ultimates settle is going to be a recurring theme throughout all of the examples. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest angles of skill expression for the ability, and it's something that's chronically underleveraged. Even watching London, we can watch right now international level teams who are missing out on this value on a regular basis. Moving over to anti-exec, G2 has done a pretty good job of locking Loud out of B. Loud tried to brute force the exec, dumping a Hunter's Fury, but G2's first wave of stall util does a pretty good job of stopping that in its tracks. Even as that first wave of stall fades, G2 doubles down with their Reckoning, redrawing that top long battle line. This creates a great scenario for G2 where not only are they able to now set up a 3-point crossfire on site and develop their late rotator in Astra, but it's setting up Jaws Neon on the flank to easily close out the round. Going over to attack, G2's exec Reckoning clears center site, Heaven, the back half of halls, and settles in an extremely interesting position. Jogs Neon ends up dying on exec, but had he survived, the battle line that this ult draws suggests some pretty cool intent. Aggressively contesting rotates. This ult would probably even look better with a duelist with verticality access, so they had the option of contesting the Heaven segment as well. Finally, we get to post-plant, and my favorite of the bunch because of how excellently executed the micro of it all is. G2's found themselves in a post-plant, they're droning for information to match their high tide dropping. As that high tide drops though, they opt into re-upping that battle line with their Reckoning as soon as the drone secured its information. The beauty of the micro here is that Jog's position cues a counter swing from Valen. He takes first on any retakers, and then Valen supports, and if necessary, Trent's in the backline playing a pivot position that allows him to support either of his teammates with a bias for front sight, so that if anyone scales streets to gen, he can support Jog against those players in particular. So, time to tie it all together. Harbor is in a position where his smokes cover a broader spectrum of round structures than alternatives. Those smokes provide more variety and potency in playstyle. He has debatably the strongest piece of catalytic util to ever appear outside of the Initiator class. And he boasts an ultimate that, when employed correctly, can create checkmates in nearly any stage of the game. So what gives? Harbor's always going to suffer from adoption lag. He's not the easiest agent to play, so people really need a compelling reason to jump on board. If you remember back to our opening discussion of smokes, I laid out some causal logic. Lower initiator util meant faster rounds, and faster rounds meant weaker controllers stole metashare in places they probably shouldn't. Well, I'm also going to remind you of the initiator cooldown tweaks coming in patch 13.00. What happens when round structures change and the other controllers can't keep up as often? What happens when those 4-stage rounds become the median and not the average? I don't know about you, but if I had to stake a champs qualification, or heaven forbid, a champs trophy on it, that sounds like we're about to have that compelling reason. I hope you enjoyed this dive into Harbor, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.